So, hey, welcome back to the Aftermath webinar after show, where we are answering some of those wonderful questions that were dropped in the chat on last month's post-election engagement webinar hosted by Metromorphosis. If you have not already, you should definitely watch last month's discussion where we spoke with Dr. Marlon Smith of the Black Greeks Speak Social Justice and Human Rights Council out of Texas. We spoke with Ashley Shelton of Power Coalition for Equity and Justice, Jamal Taylor with Stand Black, and today's guest, Jennifer Harding, who is the co-founder of the Progressive Social Network and the organizing coordinator at Voice of the Experience, or VOTE. We will link the video to the Aftermath webinar in the comments, and so you should definitely watch that first. But we had such a rich discussion that we had to just go deeper into some of those topics that were brought up. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for coming back and talking to us today.
Thanks so much for having me back. I had such a fun time the first time, so I'm really looking forward to this.
Cool. Thank you so much. So one of the things that really came through on the webinar in the chat was, people really were struck by, it really resonated with people, the work that you're doing on the local level, right? And so you talked a lot about being involved with the Baton Rouge Metro Council, being active and attentive to the school board matters. And so tell us why local elections, right? Why this local space is really important.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, as I mentioned in the first conversation, I was kind of just someone who, followed politics on the news and on social media and wasn't really personally involved until, really 2016, everything that happened in our city with the killing of Alton Sterling and the flood, followed by this presidential election that kind of left a lot of us stunned, going, what is going on? What can we do? And I started to realize that there was so much that we could do here locally that would actually impact our lives, right? So there's this adage that all politics is local, and I mean, there's some truth to that, right? So I mean, here we are, our local governmental institutions are the ones that are making the decisions that are most directly impacting our lives, our families' lives, our community. And so I just really wanted to get folks plugged in and tuned in to making sure that we were engaging with those decision makers so that they were making the choices that are actually going to improve our lives and our families and our community and really move us forward. And so that's where the Progressive Social Network started, really sort of attending Metro Council meetings, learning about the process, learning about the people who sat on the council, and starting to kind of develop relationships with them and really really make contact with them. We did the same thing with our school board. We're attending the meetings and learning about how they make the decisions and what's motivating the folks who are sitting in those elected positions. So it's just so important that that we're really holding these officials accountable, but also making sure that they hear from us, because what I've heard consistently over and over again from officials is, oh, well, I didn't know that, or this is the first time I'm hearing that. And so it's important for the community, members of the public, to make sure that they ask for our vote, that they're actually executing on those promises, and that they're actually following through, and that we're actually continuing to have a conversation about what's important to us and what the community we want to see them help.
And I'm sorry, Jennifer, I had a little bit of feedback on my end. I'm not sure if that was also. Oh,
I'm back.
You're back. Okay. All right. So I was saying that I had a little bit of feedback on my end, but you know, one of the things that you talked about was engaging with the school board and the Metro Council. And so I didn't want to miss that point because I think it's critical when we talk about how people can be engaged year round. So if you wouldn't mind kind of backing up a little bit and telling us that piece again.
Right. So, you know, what I was saying is that it's so important that we stay engaged and involved and part of the conversation, even after the elections are over, especially after the elections are over. Year round, we want to be, you know, letting our elected officials know what's important to us. What do we want to see happen? What are the things that we need their help with, that we, you know, that will help improve our lives and our community in general. And so, you know, it's really sort of incumbent on us to continue to put that pressure on them,
Yeah.
and so that they know, and so that they know that there are folks watching, you know, and that there are folks that care about what they do.
Yeah, yeah. You know, we in the chat we saw a number of sentiments around people saying, you know, how do we hold elected officials accountable? It seems like they court us in the beginning, leading up to the election, and then after that we don't hear from them again until the next election. And so, you know, this idea of really needing to have engagement with elected officials, you know, after the election, is extremely important. What do you think, as we are engaging our Metro Council and even our school board and any, you know, any of our local races, because of course, in our November election, we had judges on the ballot, right? We had a number of local elections, and you know, we hear vote all the way down the ballot, but really tell the people like what that means and why is that important? Why do I care who my judge is in my district? Why do I care about that?
Right, and that is so important. I'm going to say this first. When we don't vote all the way down the ballot, when we only show up for the presidential elections or the big national elections, we are leaving our power on the table. We are just not using the full power of our vote when we skip those important elections. So step one is really to become an informed voter. There is so many resources out there now. Progressive Social Network has an online voter guide called brvotes.org, where you can go and find out about anyone on the ballot in East Baton Rouge Parish in every single election. There's other organizations out there putting out tons of information for you, so you can find the information you need so that you know who the people are. You really get a good understanding about who is going to make the best decisions for you, who has the values that you share. But when you go into that voting booth and make your choice, okay, so that's number one, is like become an informed voter. It's really our responsibility to know who these folks are. But you know, what happens is a lot of times we have these big turnouts. We had historic turnout for this presidential election. It was smashing all the records and it was just so exciting. However, we just saw in early voting for this runoff that that's dropped tremendously. And I know folks are tired, and this is 2020 has been a long year, and we're all kind of ready for it to be over, but we have this one final push that's so important. And so what ends up happening is that these, you know, smaller elections that have a lower turnout, you end up getting a very small group of people who are making decisions for the whole city. And in the case of our mayor, for the whole parish. And what ends up happening then is you risk having an individual get elected that's only representing a small group of people. And so really it's so important for us to make sure that we get out there and we make sure that we're voting for the representation that we want to see, you know, the representation that's going to actually move our city and our you know, communities in a forward direction.
Yeah, and so, you know, I'm glad you brought up the numbers in terms of what we saw last month, right, for the November election versus what we were seeing in this early voting election. Why do you think runoff elections are typically have such and I'm going to say poor turnout, but I'll say lower turnout, right? Why are runoff elections so difficult for people to get to?
Yeah, and I really think that the way we have our elections designed in this state is not great. We have way too many elections, and it is not always easy. It's a burden on people to make it to the polling place. It's our civic duty and our right as citizens to go and cast our vote, but it's not easy for everyone to do that. And what we see in presidential elections or big congressional elections is start to get interest from groups outside, of the state. We just see a lot more, just sort of money and energy poured into it. And so I think that, and just in general, I think there's a feeling that those types of elections are somehow more important. But one of the things that I've been trying to do with Progressive Social Network is really, get people to understand that these local elections, these small elections, often where there'll be something snuck in, like a little, constitutional amendment or something like that, it has a major impact, and so they're very important, and so, I just think that we just kind of have a culture that doesn't, see them as important. But again, I think there are also structural issues with having so many different elections, makes it, kind of burdensome for people to participate in them all.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up what I think is important, especially for metromorphosis as we talk about this systems change, right? Those structural barriers that make it difficult for all people of our city to participate in elections and other civic endeavors. And so thank you for bringing that up. But it was also a really hot topic in the chat, right? This idea of marginalized voices, right? And the fact that our election system in Louisiana is not necessarily set up for everyone to participate, but even even when people do participate, there is a certain section of our community that is left out, right? And I know you do a lot of work with formerly incarcerated persons, but can you talk about how to get the marginalized voices, those people who are left out of this process, how do you bolster those voices?
Yeah, and it's, and I think we've been doing a really good job expanding the voter base in Louisiana over these past few years. The main thing is that we not only do we need to be as citizens talking to elected officials between elections, but as advocates and activists, we need to be talking to voters between elections as well. And so, we've been doing a lot of, door-to-door conversations over the past few years, just really trying to get folks more energized, more engaged, and more excited about participating and voting. But what we hear so many times knocking on doors is, oh, well, y'all only come around when it's time for me to vote.
Yeah.
What happens when, it floods and my street fills up and then next thing I know, my house is flooding? Or what happens when, my child is having issues in school and there's nobody there standing with me to advocate? And so, I think that we have to continue to organize and mobilize with folks and really listen and learn, about the issues that are important to families, and individuals in our city in between the elections, and really try to, stand together and fight with each other for meaningful change in between the election cycles. It would be, we sometimes treat, elections like popularity contests where we're going to have this sort of, person that comes in and saves us all. And, an elected official is a human being. They are only one person. And so it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we are, pushing them and making sure that they're listening to us, and that they're able to understand what the real needs are of the community.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. So, I want to ask a hard question right here, because I think as you were talking And it came up in the chat. There was a lot of conversation, especially on the national level, around how people voted, right? And so there was a moment in the Aftermath webinar where we were talking about the demographics and how people have voted, right? And it came up with the percentage of white women who voted for the incumbent, our president. And we didn't get a chance to address some of the questions and the thoughts in this, but I bring it up with you now because we're having this one-on-one conversation. What are your thoughts? And this is in no way for you to be representative of every white woman that I know, but what are your thoughts on being a white woman who is and hearing that stat? Let's just start there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It doesn't feel good. I will say that, you know. I mean, as a white woman, you know, in this country that wants to see, you know, a new South and a different, you know, a different politics, you know, in general that is more equitable. It is hard. And it's an indicator of, you know, the work that needs to be done among white women, which I think white women need to be, you know, taking ownership of that work and really having these tough conversations with each other. You know, I mean, for me personally, it was, you know, it took kind of, you know, I had a sort of I went to, you know, college and Mills College in Oakland and had this very academic intersectionality, you know, kind of view of the world where, you know, I learned all this stuff in the books, but I hadn't really like experienced it, right? And then when I moved back to Louisiana, my home, it just really took a lot of like self-reflection and sort of understanding my own privilege and really kind of like figuring out, what is my responsibility as a white woman in this system, right? If I'm really interested in, you know, ending oppression and breaking, you know, systemic racism and all of these things, like, you know, what is my work in that space, right? And so, like, I think that, you know, those of us who want to see it, you know, done differently, we really have to take a hard look, you know, at irrefutable evidence here. I mean, there's just no way to spin it at this point, is that white women are not generally on board with this, you know, with this agenda. And so we really got to figure out, like, you know, why is that happening? You know, what are the sort of ways that that we can, you know, paint those cycles. And I think that, you know, in large part, that is the work, you know, for those white women like myself who want to see things different.
Yeah. And you know, as someone said in the chat, right, because we talk a lot about communities of color, they said that the onus cannot be just on communities of color, right? And I spoke with Ashley Shelton about that, and she had some thoughts in her video, but I think what you just said is that there is work for everyone who kind of wants to see this new this new agenda, and I don't know if it's a new agenda, but a more progressive agenda, if you will, right? And so I like the idea that there is work for everyone, right? Because we can get caught up in kind of like the sides, right? Them and they and those kinds of things. And so the idea that everybody has a role to play, I think, is super important. So Jennifer, what is happening that people need to be aware of? And so what are some of those hot button issues that we see popping up in local elections that people just need to be aware of?
Okay, yeah, I mean, so there's a few. You know, recently we saw our Metro Council consider passing a ballot initiative that would completely reshape the structure of our city government, which would actually add new council members and do things about term limits for the mayor and all of that stuff. And so that actually has been shelved for now, but that is something that has been brought up in conversation. And when it first came up last year, what we all kind of cried out and said, whoa, wait a second, what we need to do is the public needs to be having more of a conversation about this. So, we really need to be having a conversation sort of like as a community about, what should our city government look like? Is our city government actually representative, of our city? We have this city parish model government that tends to give a little bit more representation to the outlying parts of the parish, rather than here in the city. And so that's caused a lot of tension. We have it's going to be a completely new looking council come January, because we have 6 people who are term limited and won't be returning. So we know at least half of the council will be brand new. It could even be more than that. So so we're going to need to be learning about these folks and kind of what's important to them, and what their motivations are. We need to be having a conversation about what does public safety really mean. We have a very binary conversation happening in this town about what makes us safe, and what crime, what are the reasonings that we have a so-called crime problem, and what are the solutions. And so I think we need to be talking with a little bit more nuance about these issues. And the Metro Council is the governing body that's going to make the ordinances that really governs those types of things. And so they have a lot of power to really sort of like change the way we do policing, change the way we decide what things are criminalized and what things aren't, such as, the way that we've been treating, mental health issues and substance abuse issues. We have to have a real conversation about poverty and what's happening and what we can do to address poverty. And I think that more than ever this pandemic, we haven't seen really the economic impacts of that. And I think over this next term for these elected officials, for the mayor and for the city council, it's going to be some really important decisions are going to be made about who gets contracts, what the budget priorities are, and what are things that can be done that can really sort of like help to sort of intervene and address some of the impacts of the pandemic. Things like raising the minimum wage, or at least signaling to the state legislature that we would like to be able to have the capability of doing that, because right now localities can't. Things like that are super, super important. But again, I'm not going to belittle like people's trash pickup, or, the potholes in your street, or the fact that you're having flooding issues. Like all of those things are also like impacting folks on the daily and are just as important. And so those are the kind of things that, the Metro Council is going to take up and address. And that's, that's where you can kind of like intervene and make change there.
Yeah. So I heard public safety, policing, poverty, and potholes, right?
Right.
are all things that are handled, managed, decided at the local level. And those are the things that we see on a day-to-day basis. And so, if it's not clear already, I mean, I think I see what, I hope everyone sees why we really need to be plugged in at that local level, just as much or even more so as we are at, the federal level, right? The national level. And so thank you for that. You also brought up though this idea of minimum wage, and I don't necessarily want to get into that issue, but I do want to talk about money and about wealth, right? And so one of the topics that came up on the Aftermath webinar is the role that money and wealth plays in our local elections, right? And I know, that has come up in a number of kind of our media publications and who, you know, of course, all across social media, who's backing who and those kinds of things. And I don't necessarily want to talk about who's backing who, but I do want to talk about the importance of how of financial contributions in elections. Specifically, someone says communities of color often don't have a lot of money to put into races. And so, are there ways that those communities can combat the influence of other money, so that their voices are the people who reflect their voices have just as much of a chance at winning as others?
Yeah, and so, I mean, there's two ways to win change, right? That's organized money or organized people. And if you don't have the dollar bills, then you got to get the bodies in the room, right? And so, I mean, what that means is that, you know, campaigns that aren't able to tap into the massive deep pockets, or don't feel like the massive deep pockets of big business are aligned with the values that they have, they're going to need bodies. They're going to need our help. They're going to need us to volunteer, right? And so they're going to need us to get involved you know, in their campaigns. There's so many ways that you can help folks running for office. You can make phone calls, you can, you know, knock doors, you can fold leaflets, you can, you know, send text messages. There's so many ways that we can volunteer as individuals and actually have an impact. And I will say this, our governor's election last year was just like almost embarrassing, the amount of money that was poured into it, because it just, you know, it was just kind of like obscene. But at the end of the day, the money didn't win, the people won. And you know, there's a friend of mine who trained me on, you know, campaign volunteering and stuff like that, and she says field wins every time. And what I mean by that is a field campaign, going out and speaking to people. That's what wins elections, right? And so, you know, it's not easy. I'm not gonna lie and say that combating, you know, deep pockets is a tricky, you know, it's a trickier endeavor. And I do think that we have a disproportionate voice representing those deep pocket interests in our government, kind of like writ large right now. And I would like to see less of that. But what that's going to take is a commitment for us as voters, as citizens, to really engage in these elections, to really, you know, volunteer when we can, you know, talk about the stuff on social media, text our friends about it, and really creating a much more culture of civic engagement here in Baton Rouge. That is the way we're going to win. That is the way we're going to see our city progress. That is the way we're going to see the kinds of policies that move us forward get passed. There's just no way around it. You just have to get involved.
So say it again then. You know, what are those ways we can volunteer for campaigns? What are some of those things that we can do again?
Right. So during election season, you can volunteer for campaigns. In Baton Rouge, a lot of folks work for the government, you know, and there's rules that say you can't be partisan. So that doesn't mean you can't participate in elections. There's lots of organizations like Progressive Social Network, like Power Coalition, like Metromorphosis, who are doing work that is nonpartisan, meaning not aligned with a specific candidate or political party. So you can volunteer in that way. But if you don't have those restrictions, you can volunteer with the candidate that you think, you know, you want to support, and you can send text messages for them. You can make phone calls to voters for them. You can go knock doors and, you know, tell your neighbors about them. You can volunteer to put out yard signs. There's so many different ways that you can help a campaign. If you don't even feel comfortable yet of jumping into that, you know, that level of volunteering, simply having these conversations with your friends, you know, whether that's on social media or just, you know, in your group text, or, you know, well, we don't get to go do brunch anymore, but maybe one day we'll get to do that again. And that's a great time to talk about the issues that are important, and talk about why you think these particular candidates are going to support these things. Because we just really have to have these conversations. But once the election's over, you can stay plugged in with the same groups that I mentioned, you know, because we're still here doing the work to engage with these people once there are elected officials. You know, and it's just, you know, you can send emails, you can attend meetings, you can again pick up the phone and call your elected official and see if, number one, if they even pick up the phone and answer your call. That tells you a lot right there. Or if they respond to your email, it tells you a lot about how much they, you know, care about what you have to say. One thing that we're fighting a lot right now with the pandemic is making sure that public comment is protected at these meetings. We have seen, you know, in many cases, we had to really fight with the Metro Council to get them to continue to allow public comments that have been submitted electronically to be read aloud into the record at meetings, so that people know that they're actually, you know, reading the emails that are sent. You know, luckily we were able to do that, but we're fighting right now against the school board because they have, you know, rolled back their policy of reading the public comments aloud, even though we're in the middle of a superintendent search right now. So, you know, it's just another example that it's super important that we stay engaged in any way that we can, in contact in any way that we can with these elected officials, so that they are reminded that they work for us.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. Thank you so much. One last question for me, and then, you know, any closing remarks that you have will certainly be appreciated, because I mean the work that you are doing in the Baton Rouge community is certainly appreciated, and you know, I said this on the Aftermath webinar, and it's real. Like, every time I see y'all's blue shirts, I'm like, yes, you know, something is about to happen. And so I just love to see the work that you are doing, but specifically with formerly incarcerated persons, because I think I think we have seen how important that vote is, and getting that vote, those rights reinstated, are not just to the election, but to the success of those individuals who are returning home to our communities. And so, you know, I'm really, really excited about that work. And I think we will see more and more as the years come, that is a critical piece of the vote. But I want to talk about, ask you a question from the chat. What do you say to someone who says, you know, their voice, their vote does not count when it comes to shaping policy? What do you say to that?
Yeah, and I mean, that is, I think that a lot of folks feel that way because our system is designed to make you feel that way. But there wouldn't be so much voter suppression. There wouldn't be so many attempts to dissuade you from going out to vote if your vote wasn't powerful and important. So that's the number one thing. But, you know, we have seen how just in recent elections, how important your vote is. We had a legislative race last year come down to, I think it was 6 votes. You know, and so, like, you know, if 6, 7 people would have showed up and voted a different way, that would have changed everything. So, I mean, you really only have, the person that's running only has to win by 1 vote. And that 1 vote could be you, you know? And so that's why, you know, but more than anything, I think, you know, what I said at the beginning is, when we're not participating, when we're not voting all the way down the ticket, and we're not showing up for these smaller elections, we're leaving our power on the table. We're giving our power up to the folks that may or may not care about what's important to us in our lives. And so, you know, your vote is your power, your vote is your voice, would pick your slogan, but it's real, and it's the way that you ensure that, you know, your own future and your family's future and your community's future is the one that you want it to be.
Jennifer Harding, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I love these conversations. I thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I love them too. And listen, anytime you want to have a conversation about mobilizing people, mobilizing citizens, you are more than welcome to have a conversation with us at Metromorphosis and with me personally. I just want to thank you again for the work that you are doing. And thank you for this conversation. And thank you guys for watching us. Again, we're going to drop links to BR Votes, Progressive, Progressive Social Network, the work that Jennifer is doing, the work that she mentioned, some of those tools. You can find almost everything you need to contact your elected officials, to find the schedule for those Metro Council meetings and those school board meetings. We'll drop as much content in the comments as we can to help you stay engaged and hold people accountable. And if you have not already, please, please, please make sure that you go this Saturday to cast your vote. We have our mayoral runoff, and then we have some Metro Council districts that still have elections. So please go out and vote, because if when you don't, you leave your power on the table. All right. Thanks, Jennifer, so much. We'll be talking with you soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.